You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. I am confident in the Lord that you will take no other view. The one who is throwing you into confusion, whoever that may be, will have to pay the penalty. Brothers and sisters, if I am still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been abolished. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other.
In these verses, Paul says some weird things. He also clarifies some of the things that we saw yesterday. But he starts by saying that the Galatians started well. You are running a good race. Though he uses this to frame something negative. He says, you were doing so well. Why did you stop doing so well? Who cut you off from obeying the truth? He's talking about the false teachers that came to the churches in Galatia preaching the gospel plus. The gospel plus works, which is a rut that the Galatians have been caught in, which we've seen Paul talking about over the past few days. These false teachers would tell the Galatians that they were great. They would use flattery and empty words to persuade the Galatians. Paul then says that a little yeast works through the whole dough, which is a great baking tip, but it also speaks to how dangerous these false teachers were. See, though they were few, their negative influence found its way through the church and began to take control. Once they were there, the false teachers caused confusion around God's grace. Paul says that they were throwing the Galatians into confusion, and Paul is really angry about this. He's angry because what he used to preach, circumcision, becoming Jewish, is now being preached again. Paul says in verse 11 that if he was still telling people to be Jewish, then he wouldn't be being persecuted. He also says that if circumcision was a legitimate way to be righteous, then Jesus' death and resurrection means nothing. In his anger, Paul says that the false teachers that are preaching circumcision wish they would go the whole way and just chop it all off. This is all pretty heavy. But after he says this, his tone seems to change. He says that you were called to be free. You weren't called to obey the law. He says that you're free, but don't use your freedom to go back to the life that you had before you were a Christian. Use your freedom to love one another. The entire law is fulfilled by keeping one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Paul says that the only law worth obeying is the law of Jesus, which is using your freedom to love one another. Don't be fighting with one another, but rather remember God's grace and love one another with that in mind.